Well, good evening, everyone. As Brenda had mentioned, just want to remind everyone that this town hall, like the others, is for informational purposes only and to educate our community on the pros and cons of incorporation. We've invited Jerry Keene, Sharon Brown, and Blake Marvis to speak about their efforts on attempting to incorporate the community of Oceanside. So I'll turn it over to Jerry.
Okay, well, we appreciate your inviting us and are glad to share what we've been living and going through for the past probably 6 months, and hope that you can learn from some of what we've done. We can share the status of what we're doing, and the way we organize it is that I thought I would start off by talking about the kind of the genesis of the effort, the reasons why, and how we collected and disseminated the information in the community, and basically put together a community effort to have an incorporation conversation that gave us the confidence that we had enough backing in the community to go forward. And then Sharon's going to talk about some of the efforts that we made, which are needed under the incorporation law. You have to put together an economic feasibility statement that outlines what services your city will perform, how they are related to other services that are already there, and what they're going to cost and where you're going to get the money. So she's going to talk a bit about the research and how we put that together. And then Blake's going to talk about the actual procedure that the law requires to go forward with a petition to try to get the issue on the ballot. We're going to rely on the administrators to stop us when you've got a question you'd like us to address. We're ready to have a real overview here, realizing that a lot of what you're here for is probably going to be posed by questions rather than our anticipating it. So I'll just start off. Oceanside is a town of about 300 full-time residents and about another 300 part-time residents, according to the census. We're about 600, have over 120 short-term rentals. We are 100 years old this year. We're an established community. We're ruralized. We have sewer and water districts and a fire district. In combination, depending on which one you're talking about, some of our districts are in combination with NETARTs, and some of our districts are in combination with Cape Mears. So we have these ruralized or urbanized services already in place, and we have a pretty good history of civic involvement here. We've gone through 3 iterations of the community plan, which is based on the land use goals. And I know you folks have been involved in a similar effort. We actually had the first one back before the law required it, back in 1996. Just the community here just wanted to state its community goals. And so it's been through 3 iterations that have involved a lot of community input. So we have an active communication network, and we're used to dealing with issues on a large group basis with a lot of participation. I think the reasons that kind of brought incorporation to a head, and incorporating is basically forming an official city under Oregon law. It entails a lot of legal advantages and legal responsibilities, but the key advantage for us was that we saw that a number of the issues and developments and themes that were hitting our community were happening in a way that the county just had less and less time or resources to cope with adequately, or at least adequately as far as what we were concerned. I'd like to emphasize that none of this was ever in any way adversarial with the county. The county agreed with many of the reasons that we were pursuing and has been more than helpful in this effort. So I want to be sure that that's clear. We've never encountered any resistance at all. In fact, quite the opposite from the county staff, even though we're sitting here making the arguments that they aren't doing enough for us and they can't do enough for us and we want to do it for ourselves. They never had any defensiveness in response to that. They know they're doing what they can and they know what their resources are. So some things that kind of came together. One is that Oceanside, like everybody else, has been hit with growth in short-term rentals, with growth in visitors coming to our beach here, right in our front yard, and the impact on the neighborhoods. The impact of the short-term rentals in terms of visitor conduct, in terms of changing the nature of our residential communities, challenging our cohesiveness in terms of long-term residents, full-time residents, and the folks that were renting their houses out. Another factor was that Oceanside generates an awful lot of TLT, which is transient lodging tax revenue for the county. They take it all and then they spend it where they'd like to. And we had a long-standing concern that not much of the money that was being generated here, about right now currently about $350,000 a year, which is 10% of $3.5 million in short-term rental business we do. So the 10% tax, $350,000, was largely going to the county and largely being spent in other areas, and it's being incorporated as a way to capture that money and actually spend it locally. As I said, visitor conduct, we were very aware that the sheriff could not handle many of the complaints we have, noisy dogs, fireworks, late night parties. Really, the county doesn't have the resources to respond to those kind of things, and we had no other mechanism to do that. A city would allow for that. And then finally, our roads. Like every community, we feel like our roads aren't getting enough attention, or could be addressed in a way that was with more local emphasis and more local priorities if we had more of a voice in it. So I think those issues kind of were all coming together. Some specific things that happened. We have a road here. Oceanside currently is basically the end of a dead end road, because the Three Capes Scenic Drive comes from Pacific City up the highway to Netarts. We're 9 miles off of 101, so people hit Oceanside by coming up the Three Capes Scenic Drive. And we've had the landslide here at the lighthouse here basically cut off the route to Tillamook from here. So people to get to Oceanside have to come through Netarts and get to Oceanside, and they turn around and leave again. So we didn't have a lot of traffic coming by us, but they're in the process of fixing that now after close to a decade. And we're anticipating that we're about to get a whole lot more attention here. Part of that is exhibited by the fact that our real estate market is going crazy. We have just three commercial properties. Right now we have 2 motels, 2 coffee shops, and a restaurant. That's it on our little main street, and a post office. And so we don't have a lot of commercial stuff here, but we have 3 lots that 2 of them are on the market right now, and 1 was sold last year. All 3 of them are slated probably for attempts at building rather large hotels. And those things created tension and pressure in the town about how much control we'd have over those developments. I think all those things, which are not unique to Oceanside, but all kind of coming together uniquely here, caused us to start looking for some solutions. So our Citizen Advisory Committee, Community Advisory Committee, is the Oceanside Neighborhood Association. And our board started casting about for looking for ways to address this, and started doing research, and it looked to us like Incorporation might have a lot of potential for us. So we put together a task force, and we didn't really call for volunteers. I actually thought hard about the issues that we'd have to research, and went out and found folks in the community that had some background, some experience in those areas, and just asked them to serve, essentially as a task force, not to do a lot of recommending, but really to do a lot of fact finding for us. And they went out and researched things like services and costs, and what happens in other cities, and what revenues would be available to Oceanside if we did incorporate, and what would the consequences of incorporation be legally, and what would it take in terms of legal procedure. It was a 9-person task force divided up into teams, each taking a different area, and they did their research over the course of a couple of months. It was really intense research, but it caught people's imagination. Didn't ask anybody to support incorporation when they got on this committee. We were just looking for background. So we weren't looking for this committee to tell the community what they thought it should do. We just wanted to explain the option, what it would take, and the pros and cons. And so they put all of that together into a report. And that final report of our incorporation task force is available if you'd like to see it. I'm pretty sure Randall's familiar with it at our Oceanside website, which is oceansidefriends.org. It was a comprehensive report that talked about our research and the findings. And then we thought, what, we've got to get the community involved in this. It is a lot to absorb. It is a lot to convey. It is a lot to get input on. So we just set up a schedule of newsletters going out on our newsletter. Now our newsletter reaches about 400 people, or it reached about 400 people back then, about 250 of which were opening it on a regular basis. I have to say that once we started putting out this information, our readership doubled, our voting membership doubled. It really caught fire and brought in the community in a big way to pay attention to what we were doing. And so we started what we called an incorporation conversation, which was a series of installments. One was incorporation, why talk about it now? Some of the issues we were facing. What would an incorporated Oceanside look like? What would our population look like? What kind of services would it provide? What would it cost and where would the money come from? A revenue newsletter, a procedures newsletter about what it would take, what legally we had to do. And then the fifth, last of the newsletter was basically a survey that we sent out and asked people, say, okay, this is all the information we've had. And we put it out on a weekly basis. So people were absorbing these fairly significant but concise substantive newsletters we put out. And in between, while they were reading them, we were inviting them to shoot us questions and comments. And we were sharing those on the newsletter in between these installments as kind of a public, conversation, FAQs and back and forth and stuff, and letters to the editor kind of format. So we basically had this conversation that was a series of installments about incorporation. They were the punctuation for conversation in between, in response to the information we were putting out. Pro, con, there was a lively conversation. Ended up with a survey to see what people thought, just to take their temperature, and said, all right, we're going to present this to our neighborhood association, the ONA, and see whether the community is ready to take a position on this. The report that came out, the findings were that in the view of the task force, incorporation was a feasible option worthy of the community support. It was something within our capabilities. It didn't recommend yes incorporation or no don't. It really was a fact-finding, lay it all out group. But in the ONA meetings, we then said, all right, let's see if we can work towards a community decision on this. We actually had 5 meetings in 1 week and broke all of our records for attendance. They were Zoom meetings. And we just basically talked about and presented information driven by the chat, driven by questions. And we looked at every question, we read every question, we responded to every question. We let people talk live if they wanted to. They wanted to convey their message or their opinions. And we really had a week-long town hall involving each night. First night was 200 people. We blew out our Zoom cap. We didn't even know we had a Zoom cap. we hit it, so we upped it. And then we had 3 more substantive meetings over the course of that week. And then at the end of the week, we posed 3 questions. 1, do you agree with the report this is feasible, or do you just want to kill it now? That was the first vote. That vote came out 75% in favor of continuing to consider it and not to kill it. The second vote was then, all right, we're going to offer you 2 options here now. One is going to be to hold off on taking a position and let's do more research and talking as a community and convey it to the commissioners down the road, or let's just take a stand now. And we put each of those on the ballot. And after all this talk and conversation, the vote was 60-40 in favor of just going forward and endorsing incorporation now and to start the process. So with that, what we consider to be extremely significant support, that vote took place at a meeting with 200 logins. And remember, we only have 300 full-time people, and a bunch of them live in couples, and then a bunch of them were part-time, 600, but we had a solid 30 to 40% of the community participating in a Zoom meeting where they took a vote. And all of them were vetted. Everybody that votes here has to register, and we double check to make sure they're on the tax rolls. They either own property here or they live here, full-time or part-time. So these were legitimate community members, and they voted 60-40 to go forward. So I think that's my spiel on how we went forward. I would urge you to take a look at our materials on the website. As people came online to the conversation, they kept saying, I just heard about this. What's going on here? Why haven't I heard about this? And we'd say, catch up. It's all there on the website. Read everything that everybody else that's already online has already read and talked about. Catch up and join us. And we just had people join and join and join. By the end, we had 600 people on the logins, 400 450 people opening the emails within 24 hours after sending them, and 200 logins for our Zoom meeting. By any measure, that was a huge percentage of our community taking part in this and being excited. And they weren't all for it. There were a bunch against it. It was a lively conversation, but we did hash it out. And 60/40 is pretty significant for just about any kind of a community initiative that's this significant. So Sharon, I think probably kind of pass it on to you now to talk more about the information we shared in terms of the costs and services, and describe our situation and the outline that we presented in terms of what our city would do, what it would cost.
Okay. Well, I'm Sharon Brown. I'm one of I guess, Jerry's legal team. And when he initially came and spoke with me, I was skeptical about this idea, and over time became really convinced that it is a very economically feasible alternative, and a good one, just from the perspective of what we could do for Oceanside beyond what is being done just right now, being a census designated area. So when we looked at our creating this economic feasibility statement, the statute describes the different areas that you have to cover. So we focused a lot on what our current existing arrangement was in terms of, you know, who provides the sewer services, who provides water services, who provides police services for us, all the different things, that fire enforcement and so on. We're in a bit of a unique situation in that much of, when we looked at many of the other cities, especially the other cities in Tillamook County, they vary widely in terms of whether they have their own sewer system that the city runs versus a district that's independent. We were a bit fortunate in that many of our services are already run by these independent districts that would continue to run even if we incorporated. They would still continue to be serving the city independently. So we went through in our economic feasibility statement all the different things that we thought Oceanside, the city, would provide independent of these other districts. And as Jerry mentioned, they really focused on some basic things. Roads, which the county had been providing, but we even spoke with county staff in the roads department, and they admitted, you know, we're not their priority. We're at end of the road, very little through traffic historically, especially since the Maxwell Mountain area has continual landslides, and they're finally going to fix that road. Roads and stormwater management were one area. Code compliance and enforcement is something that we were very interested in taking on, just to deal with locally the issues of some of the short-term rental issues that go on when garbage gets dumped on the side of the road, or people park and block the streets and things like that. Incorporation would allow us to provide a lot more attention to those details that actually our residents get the most upset about. So that was helpful. Emergency preparedness. There are lots of things that a city could do, and grants that are available for that that are simply not available to an unincorporated area. Recreational services. We have a state park, which is basically our beachfront yard. And so we are interacting with a lot of people that come to take advantage of that. The transportation district is served by the Tillamook County resources, as is police services through the sheriff's office. And then again, we have solid waste, water, and so on that are also served by those other districts. So when we looked at part of the economic feasibility statement requires you to forecast what your income might be as a city, and then what your expenses might be for the services that you identify that you would be providing.
Yes, Sharon?
Yes.
I just interrupted for just a second. Another big area that the city would be providing would be land use services, planning services.
Yeah, hadn't gotten there yet. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. That
That's
was
correct.
your list of services. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly right. The one of the things that our community really mentioned was they were concerned about development and feeling sometimes like they didn't have a lot of say in what permits were granted in terms of big developments, commercial developments. We've seen some large subdivisions that are starting, and as well as our small hotel cabin arrangement has now been sold, and they're going to tear those down and put in a large hotel. So those kind of changes also have kind of pushed a lot of the interest in this. Our Oceanside organization, ONA, had previously done a lot with the county in terms of developing our own little area, Oceanside area zoning and like we developed our own light and building height formulas and had suggested that to the county, and that's also going through the process to be adopted. But I think our community felt like a city would provide us a lot more control and input in those decisions. And so that also was one of the big services that the city would provide. So the law then requires that you look at forecasting your income and expenses. And that's probably one of the hardest things that we've tried to do, because that is, it's pretty difficult. When you look at resources coming in, there's income that we can identify from the county information on short-term rentals, both license fees and potential user operator fees, as well as the TLT, transient lodging tax income. So we were able to pretty much identify that with the county's help, what potentially might come to us as income from that. And then we also looked at trying to set a tax rate that might be appropriate, minimum of what we thought would cover our expenses and still give us a good operating basis working into the future. That Jerry came up with that number, and it still seemed like a bit of voodoo how he got there, but we came up with a 80 cents per thousand of property values that would be the tax number that we felt would cover our expenses. So then when we looked at all of the different income that might come in, we also looked at then what would we need to have to operate a city government? Staff costs, office rent, equipment, insurance costs, professional services such as legal services or accounting services. I'm sorry? Land use. We also thought that perhaps we would not just have land use services be operated within our city, small city government, but also look to use consultants, as many of the other small cities in the county do as well. And contract for roads and try to find, the grants that are available from the state and from other organizations for road improvement that are not available to unincorporated areas, and use that income as well, and contract with different people who might be able to do the roads maintenance and improvement for us as well. And then emergency preparedness, which we already do on a very limited basis, but improve that and all the different components that go into that. Code compliance, which I mentioned a little bit before, just someone to address the issues of the fireworks, which seems to always happen and terrifies my dog, the parking issues, the garbage issues, those kind of things that go along with the short-term rentals, so that we would have that ability to keep that in-house. And so the law does require that you propose your first and third year budget for that. And so we went through a pretty detailed process to do that. And that also is on our website if you go and look. We were very careful to try to be as meticulously transparent as possible with all of our community, and putting, in addition on the website to the conclusion documents, also all the supporting emails and memos and research that we did in order to kind of try to find out what was available and what other areas were doing. And that helped a lot. And so that really, all of that went into our economic feasibility statement. And then in addition to that, the law requires that you be able to project that you feel you'll be able to meet the land use, state land use goals as well. So we also went through that in our discussion. So our economic feasibility statement is a living document in some ways, because as time goes on and as things change, it's being updated and improved. And I think we've learned a lot through this process. It is very helpful for us to have people who've worked in accounting and people who've worked in law and people who've worked in city government in the past to be able to give us real life, real time information on those areas. And I think that's helped a lot. So I hope that's kind of an overview of what we did. And I'm happy to give you any specific answers to any questions I can.
Yeah, I just would have mentioned that we also spent a lot of time reviewing city budgets from other areas, not only in Tillamook County, but also in other cities that were roughly our size in other areas. So we could see what they spent on things, what their FTEs, their full-time equivalents were devoted to different tasks that we would be doing as a city. And also the other resource, which was mentioned on your questions, was there is state revenue sharing available to cities that isn't available to unincorporated areas, gas tax, marijuana tax, liquor tax. And those things are actually allocated to cities based on magic formulas that they do. And the League of Oregon Cities actually did a projection for us. They come up with a per capita amount of money that you could probably expect, we could expect if we incorporated, that we could then just multiply by our population. And the population figures by law we got from the most recent census. So it was fortunate that we had a recently completed census that we could take that money and apply it to the population. So those are the only two things I just wanted to mention, other resources that we made use of for this research. So then we had to file put together this economic feasibility statement. And really it was just an outgrowth of the research we had done for the community. When we were outlining to the community in our report, we actually put a budget in that and people were debating items in it. And we used that public input to help shape ultimately the budgets that we put into our economic feasibility statement that we had to submit to the county before we can actually put together a petition. And that's what we then did. We put together a petition with our economic feasibility statement to the county. And I think that's a good transition time for you, Blake, to introduce yourself and talk about the procedures.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. Hopefully everyone can hear me well. Let me know if not. But my name is Blake Marvis, live here in Oceanside, obviously, and looking forward to kind of speaking with you all and answering any questions you have. So I'm going to have the exciting task of walking you through what I'm sure everyone wants to do at 6:30 on a weekday, the statute that governs incorporation in Oregon. So let's put on our legal hats for a second here. I'll be as brief as possible because I know there's a lot of questions, but just want to give you folks a broad overview of essentially how you go about actually filing this type of petition to incorporate a city and what specific requirements the statute that governs this type of procedure includes. So the statute that we're going to be talking about is called ORS 221, which governs the organization and government of cities in Oregon. One thing that is kind of important to mention at the outset is that the statute uses some language often, and it refers to a county court as the body that will actually approve an incorporation petition. And the county court here means the Board of County Commissioners, essentially. So whenever you see that reference in the statute, if you're poking around, just remember that it is going to be the county commissioners here who are actually going to be ruling on this petition, not an actual sitting court or a judge. So essentially in Oregon, under this statute, it allows a population of 150 people or more in a given area to come together and submit a petition for incorporation and try to create a city in that location. The petition process itself is governed by ORS 221031. And essentially this requires that petitioners get together and file a petition with the county clerk in the county where the proposed city lies. So here, if Neskowin was to do this sort of process, that would be in Tillamook County as well, where we also submitted our petition. Essentially, the statute lays out the requirements that a petition has to have a cover sheet, which includes the names of the lead petitioners, the city name that's going to be adopted, and the proposed tax rate of the city. So those three things actually have to be on a cover sheet of the petition itself.
And a map.
Yeah, and so what we also have to have is the tax rate as well, and then you also have to have the map of the exterior boundaries of the city. That has to be a certain size, so make sure you want to check on that. One thing that I just mentioned is that it made sense for us to create actually a political action committee to submit this petition rather than doing this individually. So just something to keep in mind if you're wanting to go this route. It is helpful for various reasons to have actually a political action committee be the petitioner and then have individuals who are part of that committee be the lead petitioners. The statute also requires that you need to submit what Sharon referenced, which is an economic feasibility statement or analysis. As she kind of pointed out, this has to include description of city services, has to show that there's basically an adequate level of tax rate that's going to meet those services, and has to have a first and third year budget. So that's really where we spend a bulk of our time, and it's definitely a lot of the legwork with there, as Jerry and Sharon mentioned, is getting that economic feasibility statement in proper order and to make sure that it actually provides numbers that are feasible. And then lastly, you also have to comply, kind of a small point, with ORS 22103113F, which essentially requires that an incorporating city can't dissolve any special districts in the area. So if you were governed by a special district such as water or fire, you need to make a declaration in that petition that that's not going to be dissolved through the incorporation process. Essentially, then what happens is you submit this petition to the county clerk, and the clerk stamps the date and time that it was submitted, and then authorizes the petitioners, if the petition's in order, to circulate the petition and begin gathering signatures for the petition to be approved. Our understanding is that the petition and the EFS, the economic feasibility statement, both need to be submitted concurrently, and that's kind of governed by the statute. So just make sure both of those are submitted at the same time. Essentially, then you'll gather 20% of the population will have to sign signatures approving of the petition. And this needs to be done within 6 months of the filing of the petition, but obviously for practical matters, we did that a lot quicker, and it makes sense to do it as quickly as possible. Once those 20% of registered voters in the area are gathered for signatures, then those are submitted to the county clerk for review and approval. And if 20% of those signatures are approved of, or I'm sorry, if 20% of the population has signed on and those signatures are approved, then the petition is essentially approved of and sent to the commissioners to start scheduling hearings, and notices are put out for those hearings. So pre-hearing notices in this situation require at least 2 weeks prior to the hearing date. And those are published in local newspapers within the county that are in general circulation. So I believe we did ours in the Headlight Herald, if that's correct, Jerry. But so those are, one notice is circulated in the newspaper of general circulation, and then 3 other notices are posted within the proposed city boundary for people within that area to see. Usually those are at general places of meeting, community hall, post office, things like that. So essentially those notices are posted for 2 weeks to give people a view that a hearing is coming up. And those notices have to include the time and place of the hearing, describe the boundaries that are set forth in the petition, so what area this is going to encompass if incorporation goes forward, and essentially state the purpose of the petition, which is to incorporate a city. So then essentially the hearings itself, once those notices are posted, then you have hearings with the county commissioners where they sit as the court in this type of proceeding. Objections are allowed on a somewhat specific basis. Essentially, people, in this scenario can only really object to the granting of the petition, which from our understanding and legal analysis essentially deals with whether these procedural requirements I just kind of spoke about are met. And so that one's pretty straightforward. Generally, it's going to be pretty easy to meet those. The other objections that seem to be allowed under the statute are whether the boundary should be altered or modified in any way to encompass either areas that are benefited or to exclude areas that are not benefited. And then as well, you can object to the estimated rate of taxation. So one thing to note though is that essentially, if a place is included that isn't benefited and should be excluded, or if a place isn't included in the proposed city boundary that would benefit from the city being incorporated, the commissioners can't exactly deny a petition for that reason. More, they can alter the boundaries, but would then have to approve of a modified petition by submitting a new boundary map. And so really the only basis for getting a petition denied in a county commissioner hearing on this issue would be if there was a procedural defect or something wasn't filed, if enough signatures weren't actually gathered, or if the estimated rate of taxation has valid objections and the commissioners find that that estimated rate isn't feasible to support the EFS and to support the city's budget. Essentially, after, if a petition is approved of in this type of hearing in front of the county commissioners, then an election occurs not sooner than 90 days after the approval of the commission, and that election will be in the next primary or general election. One thing that we found out somewhat late in the day was that under the statute, essentially, unless you want to deal with having to get past a double majority vote in a regular election, you have to hold an election in May or November of a even numbered year. We could explain that more in detail, but essentially those are kind of the rules in that situation. And so a double majority is obviously a pretty difficult thing to get past. And so practically the statute kind of confines these types of elections to odd, even numbered years in a November or May election. And essentially the kind of last thing that would happen is if incorporation is placed on a ballot, both the city being approved would be on that ballot and the city council people, 5 of them, would be all running at the same time that the city is actually being proposed. So you would have city council races and the incorporation of the city itself occurring at the same time. So that then if the city passes, the people who are going to be actually running the city and be on the city council will be elected in right away and the city can start functioning. So that's kind of a broad overview of how this process works, from gathering the petition, submitting it, and then kind of how it works with hearings and afterwards towards an election. So I know that was probably thrilling for everyone, but I think more exciting questions are on the table now. So thanks, everyone.
Probably then the last thing we should share with you is actually what happened with us, what we learned, and where we're going from here. As I said before, we actually mustered a pretty persuasive and convincing consensus in the community. The majority wanted to pursue it, and we managed to get our signatures on the petition. We needed 20% of our voting population. We had 330 voters, I think. We had to get 65 signatures. We got 85, and we got them in a week and a half, and we got them in the week and a half that included Christmas. We just, you know, it just caught fire and everybody was ready and we just zoomed. So we got our signatures in, we got our hearing set with hearing dates, and we had 3 full hearing dates set, dates certain that could go, you know, half day longs, thinking, wow, that's plenty. So here's the things that hit us as we got into the hearing format and issues you might want to anticipate. One is, incorporation is a very rare thing. There have only been 2 successful incorporations in Oregon in the last 100 years using this statute. There was no guidance, there was no precedent. There was Lapine, and I called to talk with Lapine. Nobody there in La Pine in the city had been there at the time of the petition. I contacted just one guy that was part of it at the beginning, and nobody had any records. Nobody had a model of what an economic feasibility statement looks like. Nobody, we just had to make all this stuff up as we went and present it to the county, hoping they would agree that what we had done fit the statute. So ultimately, I think the county does agree that our EFS met everything. They did agree, and that it could be used as a model if you wanted to go forward, the organization, the outline of the economic information we presented. When we got to actually be in front of the commissioners, we had it in our minds based on what we had seen had happened in other incorporations. We actually read the transcripts of their incorporation hearings. We thought the county staff would do a lot more orientation and guidance to the county commissioners about what the hearing was for, what the issues were, what they weren't, that it wasn't a hearing on incorporation. It was a hearing on whether to have a vote on incorporation. The issues of whether or not to include areas that we didn't include or to exclude areas that we did exclude, really people had a deer in the headlights look on them. They didn't know how that was supposed to work. We had actually just used the same boundary that the county used when they created an unincorporated area of Oceanside and acknowledged it back in the 90s. We just used the same boundary, except we adjusted it outward a little bit, working with the assessor so we didn't split tax lots. And we included a few houses that had been built just outside the boundary into the future. But we have one special area in Oceanside called the Capes. It is a self-contained gated community. It's got a fence entirely around it. They pay for their own roads. They have really intense regulation of their design standards for building and heights. They have a well-funded emergency program. They're just essentially an independent city. And under the statute, you're not supposed to include areas that wouldn't benefit from incorporation. And for the life of us, we couldn't see how the Capes would benefit. We thought if we were them, we wouldn't think they would benefit. And we thought the commissioners would probably let them out if they asked. So rather than waste a lot of time with that, we just excluded the Capes from our analysis. Mistake. soon as that issue just sidetracked so many discussions because they wanted to know, how did that happen? Why did that happen? What were the criteria? Who asked us? Why do we say yes to them? What about everybody else that didn't want to be in the city, who didn't want to pay a new tax for be part of the city? How do you process that decision? So we ended up being blindsided by that issue, thinking, first of all, that it was pretty clear cut. And secondly, that the county commissioners would have their own procedure for dealing with that issue. They would look at it and take the evidence and make those decisions to whether or not to alter the boundary, so they can then get to looking at our economic situation and say that we had done good due diligence and put us on the ballot to get a vote. The Capes issue just repeatedly kept coming back to that. There was suspicions of backroom deals and why do we say yes to them? And what about all these other people that want out? So that was mistake number one. We would recommend that if you're going to do a city, that you use an established boundary. You have an unincorporated boundary. It went through public hearings probably in the 90s. It was recognized as part of Tillamook's land use plan. And we would say just go with the county boundary and let the areas that might want to be excluded come to the county commissioners directly. Don't try to make things easier by letting some people out yourself. Let those folks go to the county commissioners. And related to that, when you're getting ready to go to the county, be sure and get them to schedule enough hearings to give you a lot of time to work out these issues. We thought 3 would be enough. We're going back to the commissioners with a second petition, and we're asking for at least 5 this time. So that's a tip. Now, what happened was at our hearings was, first of all, they got sidetracked on the Capes issue. Secondly, there was a lot of uncertainty about how to evaluate our economic analysis, and we really overestimated the ability and time the commissioners would have to look at what we provided them. If you go on the county website, you can go back to our hearings and look at the packet of exhibits that the commissioners looked at. They're still online, and just go to the agenda back for incorporation. If you want the dates, let us know. We had presented them with a 40-page petitioner's analysis that had outlines and services and maps and all of our public outreach efforts and how many people attended our meetings and what the votes were and all of this stuff. And the commissioners hardly looked at any of it before the first hearing. They didn't have time. They kept taking time to ask questions we had already answered. So we would try to explain it's right there, and they would say, well, that's just legal mumbo jumbo. And we started getting into this back and forth with them to where we were asking them to to implement a statute that hardly anybody has ever implemented. There's no guidance, there's no precedent. Staff hardly had any guidance to give them on how to proceed because they'd never done it before. And we just ended up wasting a lot of time with the commissioners with what became a kind of a disorganized presentation on issues, where we would try to go with our presentation as it was organized, and they would keep asking questions that would throw us, off rhythm or out of order. Sometimes asking the same question 3 or 4 times, and we had already answered it, but that just wasn't sticking. So don't overestimate how much prep there's going to be. I think the county commissioners now, if they entertain another petition in the future, they're going to have a little more what to expect. Anybody that does it is going to use our stuff as a model. And big tip I would say is submit your stuff way before the hearing, so the county commissioners have a chance to actually review it before the hearings and start asking you questions. They also had questions about whether or not our tax rate was too low, and 80 cents per thousand is a low tax rate, but in the conversation, they never really incorporated the fact that in Oceanside, the average house was worth between $500,000 and $600,000. And so 80 cents per thousand generates the same amount of money as much higher tax rates in other cities like Wheeler and Bay City and more like, Manzanita. So we don't think there was a real good outline for them to how to analyze. They just thought, well, that's a low tax rate. That's going to be, that's going to hamstring the city in the future. And we ran out of time to help explain to them all the other information we had about TLT tax, about new commercial developments coming online that were going to increase our tax base. A lot of things that would have allayed their concerns, but we just ran out of time to present them. And when I say we ran out of time, this is what I mean. They initially issued an order, or it took an oral vote denying our petition, basically partially because of the Capes issue, even though they really didn't articulate that as the reason. They really looked at our tax rate and said it was too low without really explaining why. We had filed a motion for reconsideration, said, will you please look at this again? We think your questions are answered in our materials. We'd like, please reconsider and reverse yourself. They said, okay, we will reopen it and reconsider, but then they didn't have time on their docket to have more hearings until like a month later. Now, under the law, you have to be set at the next hearing. So we wanted May, and under the law, the commissioner's final order on our petition had to issue at least 90 days earlier than May. And we set hearings up in January and February thinking that's going to be plenty of time. But as it turned out, given that they were going to reconsider and give us more time, there was no time on their docket, and we passed that 90-day point. So even if they allowed our petition, it would have had to go to another election, and our economic feasibility statement budget showed a timeline of when we expected the money come in and how we would spend it on staff and phasing in the city. And all of that basically became moot once we missed the election. And here's why, and this is a key issue. Cities can only collect taxes once a year. You collect it as a line item on the county taxes. The county sends out the city tax as part of their county tax bill. In order to get on the county tax bill, a city has to adopt its tax and communicate that and certify that to the county commissioner or to the county assessor by July 15th. So by our missing the May election, the next election would put us past July 15th. And even if they approved our petition, we would go a year and a half without income because of the timing of the July 15th deadline. And so we didn't take signatures from people based on a city that was going to go without income for a year and a half. It completely voided our budget. And so we told the commissioners, never mind, we've run out of time. Go ahead and deny our petition, but do it with specific reasons stated in the order that we can use and address when we try again, which we are going to do. We told them we could appeal this. We don't think this was quite handled right, but that wouldn't serve anybody's purpose. What we're going to do instead is agree on an order denying our petition, but you've got to give us guidance. for the next time. So right now, we actually have drafted an order for the commissioners to look at and adopt that we're waiting for them to get back to us on. But we know they're going to issue a final written order denying that petition. Meanwhile, we have rewritten our economic feasibility statement. We just finished it up today, as a matter of fact. We've recalculated, we've redone it with a budget that assumes we'll have a vote in November. We've updated it with more information that we think will help allay their concerns about the tax rate. And we're going to ask them again. And we're going to be collecting, we're going to file it with the county clerk Monday, and we're going to collect signatures in May. And we're asking for at least 5 hearings in June and July. Our deadline is August 6th to get an order to make the November ballot. So we're going to try to take advantage of what we learned for the first time around. We think the commissioners are also much better prepared. Staff are much better prepared. And we're all going to try it again, knowing a little more of what we're about. Please do not take what I've said as a criticism of staff. I hope that didn't come out that way. We mean the opposite. Yes, there was some frustration thinking that they would provide the commissioners with more guidance, but really there was not much guidance to give. There wasn't much precedent. And in terms of resources, tax information, getting our hearings, reading the statute, making sure we think we've met it, we have had nothing but cooperation from Sarah Apsher's office, this is considered a land use matter. So Sarah Apsher, Department of Community Development, has been our key contact person. And we're now working more closely with Joel Stevens, who's the county council. And we're gonna try it again, and we're aiming for approval by August to go on the ballot next November.
Can I make a quick comment?
Sure.
One of the things that we really noticed in the public hearings was the desire by the county commissioners to hear from anybody who wanted to have input on this. And so as public hearings tend to go, there was a lot of public input. What wasn't clear, and there's no manual for this, we found, and so we were all learning as we went. But when you have a community or a neighborhood that wants to be excluded from your boundary, there's no necessarily written guidelines or even logical guidelines on what the county commissioners would consider in order to make that finding. It's just not clear in the law. All the law requires is that they be benefited by the city. And if they can show that they would not be benefited by the city, then perhaps the county commissioners should redraw the boundary. The difficulty is we had scattered members of various communities coming in and saying, I don't have any potholes in front of my house and the roads are fine as far as I'm concerned, so I don't want to be a part of the city. There was no, so obviously you can't just exclude one home when your neighbor wants to be incorporated, but you don't. Realistically, that's something that should be up to the election. But the law, it makes it, I think, difficult for anyone to sort out how does a neighborhood or a development decide that they don't want to be in the city. It's really not clear, and we spent a lot of time on hearing just individual concerns about that, as well as the opposite, people who are really enthused about coming into the city, as well as many. There wasn't just testimony in the hearings, there were also letters and emails and phone calls to the county commissioners on those issues. So that took up a great deal of time that I don't think we really thought would be quite as ill-defined a process as it was. The other thing that did come up that again was new to us, the state land use goals in goal 11 says that a sewer and public utility systems, but specifically sewer and water, can't be extended to undeveloped properties outside of a community boundary. And so if the commissioners do decide to exclude certain areas from the new city, then you have to deal with, well, what's going to happen to those not yet developed communities? What are the properties? What happens as far as their ability to have public utilities? Now, I don't know how that would apply to your area because I'm really not familiar with how your utilities are developed, but that was kind of a wild card that we learned during the process, and we'll be much better prepared for that argument when we go in this next time.
Yeah, the way that plays out is we excluded the Capes. We have an unincorporated boundary that includes the Capes. Oceanside as an unincorporated community includes the Capes. And state land use law says that to get sewer services, to hook up to sewer services, you have to either be in an unincorporated boundary, a recognized boundary, or a city. And if we excluded the Capes, they were going to be in neither. And all of a sudden, we discovered a situation where the 30 some odd undeveloped lots in the Capes would not be able to hook up to sewer, even though there are sewer lines under them right now, because the state law wouldn't let them hook up. And we didn't realize that until really late in the process. And so going forward in this new process, we're just going to include the Capes. And we think the fact that being able to continue to access sewer is going to be enough of a benefit that the commissioners will probably just say, no, everybody's in, have your vote. We think that's where it's going to go. One final thing, and I think we should probably take questions, is we did also learn the commissioners were distressed, by the fact that under the incorporation statute, there's no requirement to provide any kind of actual notice to every property owner in the proposed city. It just says, get a petition with 20% of the electorate, and then do public notices for the hearings by posting them in a newspaper and posting them in public places. There was no, like in a land use decision, everybody affected gets mailed a letter from the county saying, we're going to have a hearing on this thing that might affect your property. The commissioners absolutely agreed we did not have to do that. But on the other hand, there was a definite undercurrent of one of the reasons they were so uncomfortable with allowing the petition was because we didn't do that. And so we actually have raised money, and the second time around, even though we don't have to, we're going to generate postcards to every property owner in the proposed city saying there's a petition being circulated. If successful, it's going to mean hearings on incorporation. You'll be part of it. Watch the county's website for the hearing so that you can participate when it happens. This is your notice. So we're gonna actually do that this time to ease the commissioners' minds, even though it's not legally required to do so. I think probably we should back off now, because we could probably each of us talk forever, especially me. I'm known for that. To have Randall or whoever go ahead and be the traffic cop for questions.
Yeah, Jerry, this is Chris. So we've had a fair
Okay.
amount of questions that have accumulated over the past 60 minutes, and I think I'll follow the FIFO approach and read off the earlier ones first.
We'll be brief so you can get through them.
Okay, so one question is, why were people against the proposed incorporation?
I think the number one articulated reason was that it would have meant another 80 cents per thousand on their tax bill. For in Oceanside, for a $400,000 home, that would have been another $320 a year. That was probably the main reason. The second main reason, I think, was this sense of, that this is not, we just want things to stay the same. We don't want this new layer of government. We don't want this new group of people we're going to have to deal with controlling our property, writing, administering our land use laws, code conduct, things like that. Our answer to that was, that's not on the menu. Staying the same is not on the menu. We're going to change no matter what. It's coming at us. It's just how it's going to be controlled. So that was probably the second biggest articulated one. You guys can think of anything else? I think that was the main stuff.
I would say that generally realtors in the area were against the petition because they perceived it as possibly raising or lowering property values because of an extra layer of permitting and government. I don't think that is really substantiated by anything though. So.
Okay, great. This next question is for Jerry. Jerry, you mentioned about capturing the short-term rental tax and taking it instead of the county. How does that work? How does the mechanics of that work?
Under county law, the county has a 10% short-term rental tax for all short-term rentals in unincorporated areas. But if it's a short-term rental in an incorporated area, the county only collects 1% and gives up to 9% as a credit for any local city short-term rental tax. So the bottom line is that if the city enacts its own short-term rental tax, and we're talking about the transient lodging tax now, the TLT tax. If the city enacts a 9% tax, it'll be 100% credit against what those same short-term rentals would pay the county anyway. But the city ends up capturing 90% of what's now going to the county. And then there are state laws controlling what you can spend it on. 30% of it can go to general fund for any services, any services or use. 70% has to be retained and used for tourism facilities. And there's a broad gray area about what meets that, and that's a whole other seminar. But suffice it to say, we've had conversations with the powers that be that control that, both official and unofficial, and are pretty sure that we'd be able to make good use of that 70% with some things that would benefit both visitors and residents. The other part is the county has just enacted what's called a short-term rental operators tax, or not a tax, can't be a tax, a fee. It's $75 per bed per capacity of the short-term rentals. If we formed a city, and that money for the county is collected and goes, I think, partly 25% to law enforcement and 75% to the new housing commission and the housing initiatives for affordable housing. But the city could actually, and that wouldn't apply in the city. So the city could actually take over that, enact its own comparable fee and use it without regulation by the state. So I think that those are the two things we anticipated. The third thing is there's a short-term rental license fee that the county enacts, and that's is used for basically inspections, life, health, and safety inspections of the short-term rentals. And under our proposal, actually, we were going to have the county committee continue to collect that tax and continue to do the inspections because they're all set up for it. And they are willing to keep doing that in exchange for just keeping the fees. And that's a pretty good deal for us rather than have to employ inspectors or find third-party contractors. So we, at least at the beginning, we planned on not taking that revenue from the county, but instead letting them keep it and keep performing that service for us. And the county, and Sarah Absher, I think is listening, they've agreed to that and they have no problem with that. Like I said, they've been very cooperative.
Okay. Our next question is, did anyone in the government challenge your work? I think you've already addressed that, so we'll move on. Legal costs to get approval?
Volunteer.
Well, we were fortunate that the three of us plus another person on the task force are retired or active lawyers. So we did it ourselves. And
We think we're pretty smart, but we're learning as we go.
Yeah. We're probably willing to help advise others. I know I am, for a very reasonable rate of, a beer or something.
I was going to.
The next question is mine for Blake. It seems like most of the incorporation activity in Oregon occurred many decades ago. Have there been any successful attempts or examples of communities incorporating in the past 10 years?
So yeah, actually, I mean, this question kind of depends on what process of incorporation you're looking at. So in terms of the statute that we're talking about here, it's only been 2 other attempts in the past. One was Lapine and one was Damascus. Lapine largely considered a success and is still a functioning city. Damascus largely considered a disaster for a multitude of reasons and actually ended up disincorporating. And so
they're trying again. There's a petition circulating. They're trying again. So.
Yeah. Oh, really? Wow, I didn't know that. That's
yeah. I just heard that.
Well, hey, second time's a charm, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully for us as well. But yeah, no, it's definitely a little used process, and that kind of ties into how vague these statutes are and how kind of new the issues that you're dealing with under them are. So there's not a lot of guidance. There's not a lot of precedent. There's not a lot of help. So.
And Lapine's records, unfortunately, they scanned them to digitize them so they could get rid of the paper. But whoever did it only copied every other page. They just copied the front, and they didn't. And it was back-to-back documents. So we were literally trying to fill in gaps by looking at their stuff and see what they did. So,
one thing I'd note though is League of Oregon Cities has a pretty comprehensive guide on incorporation. That was certainly useful for us when we were kind of trying to wrap our heads around, okay, how do we actually do this? So
yeah, that's free and online. Just type in in a search engine, League of Oregon Cities Incorporation Guide, and you'll come right to it. And it's a great primer. It's a great basic information source. A lot of our folks in Oceanside, they read that. They went to other cities and looked at budgets. Really, people start looking at this and they see it's going to affect their lives. They go out and find this information too. And we, in our report, every city thing we looked at, every interview with a county official about staffing costs, what would it take to replace what the county's doing for us now? How many employees do you use so we know how many we'd have to hire? Every bit of that, we then supplemented on our website so people could actually go to the actual information that we used to come up with our information in the actual report. And I think if you take our report and look at what we did, it would probably serve you as a pretty concrete guide on where you could find information for yourselves.
Yeah, hopefully, Chris, by the end of this year, we can say Oceanside as an example in the last 10 years. So.
All right. The last question that I see is to Jerry, Sharon, and Blake. Thank you. Your presentation has been very informative and has cleared up some confusion about your incorporation efforts. One question, though, there are a lot of legal issues involved in incorporation, including, among others, procedural deadlines governed by Oregon law. Who did you rely on for legal guidance?
We just read the statute.
Okay.
There's
I
only,
would
there's
also
only one statute. There's only one collection of like 5 or 6 sections of the statute. It's vague, but you can find it all pretty easy.
Yeah, we did consult with a ton of local, county, state, community organizations as well to get their input and suggestions. The Land Use Development Council, the League of Oregon Cities. I mean, there's a ton of people out there that are more than willing to share, information and suggestions with you. The law itself is it's not as clear as you'd like it to be, but it's there, and anyone can read it, and it's at least pretty logical. It's all these other, how they interplay with, for example, the land use goals and things like that become the real issues that we encountered. Time and so on.
Now, 2 important pieces of legal information we did get. One is, once you incorporate, you are then obligated to put together a comprehensive plan under Oregon's land use goals, but you have 4 years to do it. And there is financial aid available. There are grants available from LCDC to help you. And because it's been done so rarely, you start saying you're really doing it and show them that you're serious, they get excited about helping you. It's an exciting prospect to them. Second, we could not find guidance on something called a city charter. Cities have options to have what's called a charter, which is essentially the constitution of the city. And then you, under that, compliant with that, you can draft your ordinances and things. And I couldn't figure out, do you have to have a charter before you can draft ordinances? And you have to have ordinances in order to write a budget and pass taxes. But everything I could see looked like, arguing about and passing a charter can take years all by itself. So I actually got League of Oregon Cities to refer me to a lawyer who kindly gave me, as a professional courtesy, some time, who worked with Lapine, and said that you actually don't have to have a charter first. The incorporation statute actually kind of lays out a mini charter about how to organize the city until you write and pass your own charter to organize it differently. So there is a way to operate as a city while you're waiting to go forward with the charter. And also, by the way, the law is pretty clear that everything that the county is currently doing for a new city, it continues to do until the city does what's necessary to take it over, if at all. So while the city is passing its own rules about controlling meetings of the city council and when they're going to meet, passing their own rules of procedure, which, by the way, there's lots and lots of model rules available, LOC and other places. You find out a whole bunch of cities have exactly the same laws because they use the same models for these things. So you don't have to start from scratch, but you do have to pass them. That takes time. While you're doing that, you can actually operate without having your own charter until you're ready to actually go through that process.
All right. Well, that is all the questions. You guys did a great job getting through all of them. We really appreciated your time this evening and sharing your process with us. Ran or Brenda, do you have anything to add?
No, it just looks like an incredible amount of work that you guys have done and done quite comprehensively. Very impressive.
Well, I would
Thank
like to add, Randall, that while during the process, I saw that you wrote several emails to the commissioners, one in particular, very supportive of us and our efforts, and a bit resentful of how they treated us. So I just like to express our gratitude. We could tell a bunch of other people were watching us and then watching other people in other county feel like, wow, they were invested in what happened to us, maybe because they want to do it too. That was nice to have that external support. So thank you.
Sure. All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank
I
you.
just want to say, I was thinking this is probably one of the most informative 1 hour and 13 minutes I've ever spent in my life. So thank you so much for sharing that information. And I also want to thank everyone who's attended, all the participants, and the 53 of us have hung in there. But thank you so much. I think we've recorded this, and I think it'll be very valuable for many, many people who weren't here today. You're doing a great service by sharing this information. Thank you.
Thank
Great
you.
meeting. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Your efforts. Impressive.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
All right. Thank you all. Good night.